Just by way of introduction, because people will pop up and down. After me, Tara's going to ask a few more questions, and then I think we're coming to a break. So if you're in need of a break after information overload, it's coming. My slide sequence is timed, so that means I can't overrun, and there's a hole in the floor that I disappear down if I go over 12 minutes. I've been in post now just over 3 months, and I was reliably informed last week that that still is the honeymoon period. So if I make a mistake, then hopefully the hole in the floor won't open up. But like a lot of you here today, I guess we've been involved in dealing with the issues of Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, over the last 20, 30 years. For me, my background would have been working more in the good and community relations field. But it's been dealing with people and their prejudices and their attitudes, and how we might mitigate those, and how we might open up some of these hard discussions. Because, you know, as someone who's grown up in this place, I was fed up with the polite conversations. And I think today is not a polite conversation. We're saying some things here, and what we're not doing is necessarily saying A plus B equals C. This is the beginning of this process, and there are some interesting facts that I'm simply going to highlight. It's up to us here and civic society and other leaders elsewhere to begin to say, well, why does that happen? What does that statistic mean? Why are people in Belfast more likely to hold negative views on certain things? Why are older people likely to hold? And those, for you involved in those sectors, are useful questions. And I think together we can move this debate on. What I don't want is the media picking up one particular view on this, one particular element of it, and leading with that, because there's a positive story in this as well, in that we are still talking about this. We're raising it, we're not afraid to talk about it, and it needs to be opened up. We need to come out in this area, and I'm glad that you have come out today. I'm glad you're answering questions, and some of these stats will be useful. I'm glad you're going to take away a very detailed report and use it, and there are data sets you can ask for. So what I'm going to do now is ask you a series of reflection and questions, and at the end of it, a couple of slides that I want to put up by way of, well, now what? Because as I said at the top of this, unless we answer that question, now what, this is a redundant question. So maybe I can have the first slide, and I want you to think, what do you see when you look at that slide? Tell me what you see quickly. Many people see a rabbit. Hands up. How many people see a duck? How many people see a rabbit and a duck? That's great, because you're like me. And the question really was around, when you look at something, it's about perception. And when you read the question, do you mean me? Did you read that as, have I been discriminated against, the rabbit? Or might I just hold negative attitudes about the other? This was a significant piece of research in that it was the third in a series of surveys, so we can, with some degree of integrity, say there are trends in some places. There was 1,100 people surveyed across Northern Ireland, and this wasn't a telephone interview, it was a face-to-face interview. There were some prompts, and therefore people were more likely to understand the questions. What's it going to do? Well, it'll inform the Commission's work. We hopefully are going to highlight some trends, positive and negative. Hopefully we'll inform the policymakers, but most importantly, it should be a challenge to us, all of us, 1.8 million of us here, and the question is, do you mean me? People need to be treated with respect and dignity. We know that. And we also know that this is mediated by people being treated fairly and equally. And I hope in our day-to-day existence and life we do that. Legislation's been in for some decades to help moderate behaviour in certain circumstances, but the survey is highlighting that there are still prejudices. So, what about me? What do I think about this term equality? Well, positively, as Darren said, 90% said they wanted and supported equality law, and 3/4 wanted it strengthened in some areas, which is fantastic. 3 in 10 actually said equality matters are as important or more important today. And when you ask people about diversity, let's remember positively that 3 in 4 of us think that public bodies should be more representative, including the PSNI, that 2 out of 3 think we need more female MLAs, and over a half more from ethnic different backgrounds. 7 out of 10 said we need more women in management roles. But when asked, what do you think are the most significant equality issues, religion, age and gender, not surprisingly, came up. That was what came off the top of people's head. And we've had laws around for those things, some longer than others, and then you can see the others down there. So people still think in terms of that. When we asked, as Darren said, who do you think are more likely to be treated unfairly? Interestingly, older people. I'm not sure why. Maybe as we have older members of our family and we can't get into a care home or something. LGB, as you see, and Catholics are in there as well, along with disabled people. About 1 person in 6 had a perception of that, with migrants and, interestingly, Protestants at the bottom there. The reality, as Darren said, was something different. The lesbian, gay and bisexual communities, the reality is that they're more likely to feel discriminated against. And discrimination is in the membership of a group, you can see for LGBT, just because they're members of that group, also receiving goods, facilities and service. And disabled people, interesting enough, if you like, expressing the culture of being disabled. The other part of that question, have I been discriminated against? Well, 1 in 3 said that they had had some form of harassment or unfair treatment in the past 3 years, double 2008. Interestingly, 14%, 1 in 6 roughly, were harassed due to membership of a group or an inability to express a culture, and works in there as well. And those are the groups, if you remember, that Darren reminded us are most likely. Black and minority ethnic groups, members of the LGBT community, people in lower household income and lower social classes, those from Belfast. We know that. So what can I do about it if you're in that position of being discriminated? Well, 7 out of 10 of us said we know there are anti-discrimination laws, we can even mention them. But only 1 in 4 actually said that they knew their rights. And that's actually less than there were in the last survey. And only 1 in 5 of that number made a complaint. It's not rocket science. Vulnerable groups are those less likely to make a complaint. And as Darren said, those from 30 to 65, third level qualifications in the West are more likely to make a complaint. Interesting question, why? Now the other side of it. What about me? Do I hold negative attitudes? Well, mostly the bulk of us don't. And in fact, there has been a decline, but as Darren reminded us, that's simply because there are more neutral people towards LGBT, but there are negative attitudes, and as Darren said, they're hardening. Towards travellers, 1 in 3, transgendered, Eastern European migrant workers, and there's an estimate there's about 4.5% in Northern Ireland. So in most cases, asked about proximity, most people said they didn't really mind. But when pressed, there was an overall hardening over the last 3 surveys when people were put in most close proximity to us, and particularly among travellers. Over half of us wouldn't like them as an in-law, and the same with transgendered. Big question, why is that? Is that about the culture of the travelling community and marrying? Is that about we don't know enough about transgendered people? The one that struck me individually was that over a third of us wouldn't want someone with a mental ill health problem as an in-law in the family. And yet stats are saying between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 will suffer from a mental ill health problem. Religion doesn't feature so much, except we still, 17% of us, don't want somebody as an in-law. 30% in some circumstances can justify prejudice. Now that's exactly the same as the Scottish, which is 28%. You know, maybe in one sense this is just people being honest. When you begin to drill this down and it comes home, maybe it's linked to some more sense of self-awareness. But the big question is, can we assist those of us that have those attitudes? Can we actually challenge those attitudes? Well, there's a challenge for us in the Commission. Every year we assist over 3,000 people with some form of advice. Some strategic cases we help with legal assistance and take them forward. And we also, as you know, offer a full programme of support to service providers and employers. Interesting enough, over half the people, when they were prompted, had heard about us. A lot of them knew something about our work, 7 and 10, and 3/4 felt we give valuable advice. And 2/3 across both main communities, there was no difference, believe that we promote equality and give good treatment to all. So there are challenges. There's challenges towards the attitudes we hold towards travellers and transgendered people, the LGBT community and disabled people. How are we going to deal with that prejudice? Because some of that prejudice, if let loose, will deliver itself into behaviours and attitudes and into discrimination. There is a place for legislation, of course, and legislation in some areas seems to have worked, but it only modifies behaviour in certain circumstances. So one way we can do this is to encourage wider civic contact and debate. So this challenge is not just a challenge to us in the Commission, but it's a challenge to all of us here today. It's a challenge to all the partners. Programme for Government has equality as one of the core themes. And we need to hold government to account to make sure that the Programme for Government delivers. But it ends up with me, a quote to finish from Jan Martel in The Life of Pi. The main battlefield for good is not in the open ground of the public area, but the small clearing in each heart. That question, you can read it, what me? Am I discriminated against? But I want also you to be challenged by saying, perhaps I am someone who has a negative attitude in that small clearing in my heart. And if so, if either of those are true, the big question after today is, where am I taking the conversation from here? Because it can't reside here. It has to go out, it has to permeate, and it has to move beyond the polite discussion. It does involve you. Thank you.